believe that married people who have transmissible diseases should not have children. No couple who has the disease of feeble-mindedness or insanity or epilepsy should have children. Babies should not be brought into the world when the father's income is obviously inadequate to provide for its food, clothing, or shelter.
On August 5th, 1926, a crowd gathered at Vassar College to hear a lecture given by Margaret Sanger, the controversial founder of the American Birth Control League. Sanger's reputation preceded her. In her dozen years as a crusader for contraception and family planning, she'd been denounced, jeered, and jailed repeatedly. Now she'd undertaken a cross-country speaking tour intended to bolster her cause by linking it to eugenics.
Margaret Sanger was laser beam focused on promoting birth control, which she saw as a liberatory agent for women. It was a hard push, reproductive rights, contraception. Her embrace of the eugenicists was a way of getting some influential and powerful allies behind her cause.
The question of race betterment, Sanger told the Vassar audience, is one of immediate concern, and I am glad to say that the government has already taken certain steps to control the quality of our population through the drastic immigration laws. But while we close our gates to the so-called undesirables from other countries, we make no attempt to discourage or cut down the rapid multiplication of the unfit and undesirable at home.
Margaret Sanger is struggling to open a conversation at a time when public discussion of birth control, let alone access to birth control, was illegal. But her views are fairly persistent with regard to issues of biological inferiority. You could argue that they're strategic, but the difference is not that significant from the standpoint of those listening to her words.
Once birth control is packaged as a way of improving the human race, it seems more manageable. And there are a lot of people that were on the fence that she convinced to embrace birth control because of its eugenic potential. It was being labeled a birth control activist that was truly controversial. Being a eugenicist was far more acceptable.
In the early 20th century, the white elitists who made up the eugenics movement were no longer just philosophers and academics. Now they were industrialists and billionaires who had come to embrace a worldview that was essentially identical to the eugenics movement. The same individuals and corporations who had once made millions on the backs of slaves were now willing to spend millions to get rid of them. But that didn't mean that these guys were interested in being public crusaders for the eugenics movement. They were certainly willing to be the brains and the money behind it, but they would hire crusaders to do the dirty work. And the primary one they settled upon was a woman named Margaret Sanger. She was the founder of the American Birth Control League and the publisher of its newsletter, the Birth Control Review. On a practical level, the relationship between Sanger and these elitists was basically a marriage of convenience. In order to advance their common agendas, they needed a front man and she needed money. And the whole thing would be held together by this kind of bizarre obsession with race and class. The result was that the American Birth Control League became the driving force behind the American eugenics movement. Eugenics would no longer just be a philosophy. Sanger and others like her were going to put it into practice.